Chapter 21. "Okay, that can't be good," Gabe said when the walls stopped ringing from the echo of the slamming door. "What makes you think that?" Jeff asked in sarcastic fury. "Everything in my life is always so almighty perfect. Why should my love life be any different?" He walked over to the engine and snapped the latch on the door before climbing into the cab and throwing his turnout gear to the floor below. "Why didn't you go after her?" "Because she's right, Gabe. She is. She doesn't need this. She doesn't need any of this." He slid out of the cab, jumped to the floor, and slammed the door. She doesn't need to be sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring, knowing the next time it does might be worse than the last time it did. She doesn't need that. She doesn't. "But you need her." "You don't think I know that?" Jeff asked harshly, not at all caring who happened to walk in and hear. "But it's killing me to see that look in her eyes. It's just one freak second away from catching up with us, and she knows it." "What is? The work?" "The fire," Jeff said, straightening so that he stood toe-to-toe, staring at Gabe from point-blank range. In exasperation, he shook his head and stepped away. "They don't give medals to the wives, you know that? For bravery in the face of a life they have no control over. They don't hand out medals and give speeches for that." He put his gear on the rack. "No, but it's the wives who hold it all together at home. They're the ones who go to the funerals and the hospitals, hoping that next time it won't be them. And they're the ones left to take care of the family when something does happen." He worked with the coils of hose that wasn't cooperating, and then stood and slammed a hand against the side of the truck. "Damn it!" His hand went up to his face to stop the emotions from pouring out of him. "I can't ask her to do that. I should never have thought I could." "Jeff, this whole thing—" With one yank, Jeff pulled the hose up from the floor. "I'm going to wash this thing out." He walked over to the door to the washtub, where he stopped and turned. "Don't worry about me, okay? This might take a while." Slowly, Gabe nodded, and Jeff pushed the door open and stepped through it. Tears had never burned so fiercely. Lisa's eyes hurt from the relentless trek from her heart to her eyes and out onto her cheeks. The lights ahead of her on the freeway blurred as she reached up and swiped the newest batch away, but they were followed immediately by their replacements. How many had she already cried? Hundreds? Thousands? And yet there were that many more stacked up and waiting for a stray thought to hit her. She sniffed them back and gripped the steering wheel. Confusion reigned in her brain. No thought could stay with her for more than a few moments at a time, and too many of those thoughts centered on what she was driving away from, who she was driving away from. Like he might actually be standing there, she looked in her rearview mirror, and a ghost from what seemed like a lifetime ago stood there, hands in his pockets, watching her drive away. The tears washed over her like a gigantic wave bent on sweeping her right to the bottom. He had put too much soap in. The suds told him that, but he didn't really care. If he could have dove into them and disappeared forever, he would have. Everything he had told Gabe was true, except for one thing. He had made it sound far too easy to let her go. That was a rip, a cleave that would never heal, and he knew it. It was a wound destined to bleed from this point until forever and beyond. And he, of all people, knew about the forever and beyond part. He'd been living it ever since that firefighter had set him on the ground under the night sky, kissed by fire and smoke, and had run back into that house. They said the bedrooms were too far gone at that point, the structure too unstable, that Bruce Malio should never have gone back in. And yet Jeff knew why he had. It was because of the pleadings of a 17-year-old kid who knew no better. Jeff wiped the edge of his cheek with one wet arm. The roof was weak. The fire had already eaten away the attic by that point. They knew that. He didn't. All he knew was that the two people he loved most were in the middle of those flames, and he pleaded for their lives. A memory ripped through him, a picture of him standing by his mother as the fireman handed a flag to Mrs. Melio, who crumpled over it like a can under a boot. He remembered the two little kids, too small to really understand, watching as their mother was led from the graveyard where their father now lay. That was the moment that Jeff had decided that this was his destiny. That was the moment, in fact, when he had shattered his own mother's heart into ever smaller pieces, although she wouldn't know it for nearly a decade. That was the moment that the course of his life was forever set. And now, in the face of that memory, he felt powerless to assimilate where duty to them stopped and love for Lisa started. Through the long nights after the accident, he had lain awake thinking through all the things he could have done differently. Yes, he had felt more helpless and bitter in those hours than most feel in a lifetime. Yet not one moment of that could match how he felt when he looked into Lisa's frightened, pleading eyes now. He had to let her go, let her get on with her life. It seemed impossible. It felt impossible. But somehow he had to find the strength to walk away. She deserved that much. "This may be just a job to you," Lisa said Tuesday afternoon as she faced down Kurt and Joel, who stood before her desk like prisoners before a firing squad. "But this is my life. I am not interested in half-done, shabby-looking, useless trash. Now, when you've got this office supply campaign ready for someone other than a 2-year-old, I want to see it. Until then," she shooed them out with both hands. The weekend, extended for Labor Day, had been spent trying to dig out from under the piles of paper on her desk. True, it needed done, but that wasn't why she did it. Everyone else was going to picnics and parties and fireworks shows. Lisa had never gone to those when she had the inclination. Now she definitely did not. All those things smacked of having fun, and that already loathsome concept was made worse by the fact that it now seemed to be a one-way ticket to thoughts of him. At all costs, she was avoiding thoughts of him. When they were gone, she sat back for 1 second and then pulled herself forward. She would not give in to the thoughts stalking her. Not now. Not ever. If Jeff could have kept his mind on the information the teacher was presenting in the hazmat class, it would have helped. Not that anything had helped since she'd walked out the door, but he could always hope. Once at home, he poured himself some water. Too tired and too frustrated with himself to make supper, he grabbed a bag of chips, sat down on the couch, and turned on the television. By now he knew the routine. Either he would go to sleep on the couch sometime around 4:30, or eventually he would talk himself into going to bed and lay there until the sun came up, telling himself the whole time to just go to sleep. He hoped it was a go-to-sleep on the couch night. He hated the others. Just as he was settling in, the phone rang, and, totally against all reason, he jumped up and rushed over to it, hoping it might be her. "Hello? Mr. Taylor?" "Yes," he said as his heart fell. "This is Zane's jewelry. Your ring is ready." Spiraling down, his heart plummeted. Why couldn't life just go away and leave him alone? "Mr. Taylor?" Yeah, I'm here. I'll try to get by and pick it up as soon as I can," he said, not meaning one word of it. "It'll be ready when you are." As he hung up the phone, the word never drifted through his mind. Thoughts of Jeff were never far away from Lisa, although she had made it a habit to camp out at her office instead of going home. 2 days she had actually gone without sleep. When she did go home, even turning on a light was dangerous, so she mostly left them off. The darkness was good company. It felt safe, like maybe she could hide there and life wouldn't notice she was missing. At work, her temper was getting shorter and shorter, so that all she had to do was walk into a room and people ducked for cover. There had been a time in her life when that would have felt like power, but now it just felt lonely. She had called Haley, who basically said, "I told you so," and so, finally, by the end of September, she was right where she had always thought she wanted to be, dealing with everything on her own. The only problem was, she now hated every single moment of the life she had always thought she wanted. "Taylor?" Captain Hayes asked, walking into the truck maintenance room as Jeff stood replacing the tools he had used to change the oil. "Yes, sir." "I was under the impression that Lisa would be sending me the schedule for the conference thing any time now, but I haven't heard anything from her. She didn't take a trip to Bermuda or anything, did she?" Jeff went back to his task. "I wouldn't know, sir." "Uh-huh." Hayes nodded. "And the fact that she won't return my calls? You wouldn't know anything about that either, now would you?" "No, sir. I haven't talked to her in a couple of weeks." "Uh-huh. Well, if you could get her a message for me, tell her that it's going to be hard for me to be there if I don't know when I'm supposed to be there." Jeff nodded. "I'll try, sir." Hayes stood for a moment, grunted, and walked out just as Gabe walked in. "Does the fact that we're in here working on the truck and they're out there playing basketball not seem at all fair?" Jeff hadn't really thought about it. Working on the truck was something he could still lose himself in, and today, more than most days, he wanted to do just that. As of this evening, he would be one step closer to full-fledged firefighter, but there wasn't a part of him that really cared. "So, what did Hayes want?" Gabe asked, as he threw the rag he had just wiped the grease from his hands on to the table. However, the motion was a little too hard, and it slipped off onto the floor. Instantly, Jeff leaned down and retrieved it. "I don't know, some dumb thing about the conference." Gabe stopped and looked at Jeff. "You still haven't talked to her?" Jeff shrugged. "I've been busy." "Man, you can be so pig-headed when you want to be. You know that?" "Thank you very much." That wasn't a compliment. For a moment, Gabe rearranged the tools, and then he stopped. "You know she probably feels the same way." "What way?" "Like the rest of life isn't worth living if she can't be with you." "I'm flattered." "No, man, you're a guy who's trashing what could be the best thing in your life. And for what? A stupid job? You want me to quit?" "No." Jeff turned to the workbench. "Well, she does." "Do you?" "No. Yes. I don't know. I don't want to have to think about it anymore. Thinking about it is getting me nowhere." "And not thinking about it is getting you, where?" Jeff just glared at Gabe and slammed another tool onto the wall. "Why don't you call her? Maybe talking will get you somewhere." "It never has before," Jeff retorted. "I don't see how it's going to help much now." "Well, it's worth a shot." But Jeff knew better. Even if he could come up with the words, he could never say them, for more reasons than he could name. The machine was blinking when Jeff got home the next morning, and he hit the button. "Mr. Taylor, this is Zane's jewelry." Jeff closed his eyes, wishing life would just go away and leave him alone already. "We still have your ring. Please remember after 30 days it becomes property of the store. Thank you." "No, thank you," he said sarcastically as he punched the off button. "Don't even start," Lisa said on October 1st as Tucker sat across the desk from her. "I am doing the best I can here, and I only have 2 hands." "What about the other 6 out there?" He pointed to the door. "Useless," she said with a shake of her head as she clicked across the screen on her computer and then down the schedule, which should have been printed a week ago. Every entry went right through her heart. The travel agency, that was Jeff's idea. He had sat right there in that chair. "Ugh," she growled at the screen. "You said we got 700 applications?" "So far," Tucker said, We're getting more into the office every day. Somehow I don't think they noticed the September 21st deadline. Apparently. Vera was trying to keep up with them, putting the kids in the sessions they asked for and stuff, but then this audit came up, and she got pulled off, and now... We've got 700 applications for 500 spots. No idea which came in first because someone forgot to put a registration date on the form, and 2 weeks to figure it all out. Basically. Where are the applications now? Most of them are in my car. Most of them? Hey, I lugged 2 bags over here. I thought that was doing pretty good. Lisa exhaled slowly, feeling like the second coming might happen before she got to leave that office again. Fine, bring them up. Jeff was putting it off. He was putting everything off, life mostly. The ring, now lying on top of his dresser, wasn't helping. It stared at him like a judge set to pronounce sentence at any moment. Still, he couldn't put it away. He had tried, but even the darkness was sad without it lying there. So he had relented, and now it sat there, a permanent resident that was going nowhere. The clock on the wall read 10:30. It was too late to call her. She was probably asleep anyway. However, that afternoon, Hayes had asked, and again Jeff had promised. Until then, he had always been a man of his word, always done what he said he'd do, no matter the cost to himself. But this cost seemed far too high a price to pay. Trying to find something to do other than sit and watch the clock all night, he stood and went to the bathroom. The stubble on his face blared how pitifully he was managing without her, and although shaving at night seemed rather strange, he pulled out the razor anyway. There was no reason to look like the return of the Wolfman, even though that's what he felt like. The phone in the kitchen rang, and the razor slipped. Ow! Crud! Bright red blood sprouted from the cut, and Jeff grabbed for tissue even as the phone rang again. He raced for it and grabbed it just before the answering machine did. Hello? You're there, the female voice said in surprise, and Jeff's spirit lifted. Where else would I be? I figured you were working, she said, and his mind slipped across the fact that it wasn't Lisa. I was coming up with all these brilliant things to say to your answering machine. Eve. Yeah? He tried to push the disappointment down. Oh. What? She asked with concern. Nothing. I just thought you were someone else. And this someone else wouldn't have light brown hair, nice legs, and wear a lot of dress suits, would she? The exhale was a little too loud. Did you need something? Oh, no, you don't. We were talking about you. Not a good subject. And Lisa? Worse subject. Oh, man, Jeff, what happened? Things were going so good. He sat down on the bar stool heavily and dabbed at the cut on his chin. Life happened, just like it always does. So, what? You're taking a break? Yeah, a permanent one. Permanent? No seeing, no talking. Not for the last month, at least. And you're okay with that? Do I sound okay with that? No, you sound pathetic. Yeah, that's pretty close. Well, then why don't you call her? Because I wouldn't know what to say. And that's different. How? Ha ha. I'm not laughing. He wasn't either. No, really, what were you calling for? She sighed. To check on some friends who I was really hoping could cheer me up. Oh boy, you called the wrong place for that. Yeah, I kind of figured that out. His brain enumerated the excuses of why he hadn't called Eve, even as his heart said there was no excuse. So, how are you doing? I've been better. You know, last weekend marked the 11th week he's been gone. It seemed like a blink to Jeff, and yet he knew for her. What are you doing Sunday? Sunday? Not much, I guess. Church with my parents at 9, football with my dad after. How about I pick you up at noon and we go do something? Like what? Your choice. I'm sick of looking at this place. Please, Eve, you'll be doing me a favor. What about Lisa? What about her? He asked, not seeing any connection. Are you going to call her? He dabbed at the drying wound on his chin, but said nothing. I'll make you a deal, Eve said, teasingly serious. You call Lisa, and we'll go out on Sunday. But, and don't flake out on me either. I'm going to want details, lots of details. And I will ask, okay? She waited. Jeff? Yeah, okay. Great, then I'll see you Sunday. When he hung up with Eve, Jeff sat looking at the phone, knowing if he walked away from it now, it would be Sunday before he got up the nerve to try again. With an exasperated sigh, he reached for the receiver, dialed her number, and waited until the answering machine had gotten all the way finished speaking before he hung up. Somehow, he had forgotten how much he missed that voice. It wrapped around him like a warm, thick blanket on a cold, dreary night. He looked at the clock and wondered what she was still doing at work. It was after 11 already. She was at work, he knew that much. Work and home, that's my life. Words from a different lifetime floated through him, and he smiled sadly as they slid through his consciousness. Picking up the phone that time wasn't nearly as hard as it had been the first. In fact, if he was honest, an illogical excitement snapped him into its clutches as his fingers dialed. He felt like he had lost his mind, and yet he felt more sane than he had in a month. Envelopes sat in incoherent stacks all over her office as Lisa stood in the middle of them, shrinking before the hopelessness that stared her in the face. There was no way to make any sense of any of this. There couldn't have been 30 opened envelopes. The rest made her want to cry, so much so that when the phone rang at nearly 11:30, although she knew it was a wrong number, she jumped for it. Matheson Agency, Lisa speaking. A moment of pause, and she thought the caller might hang up rather than acknowledge their mistake. Lisa? Yes? Hi, the voice said, winding through her. It's Jeff. Suddenly, she couldn't breathe, and the room felt at least 10 degrees warmer. Oh, Jeff. Hi. She started to sit down in the chair because her legs went numb beneath her, but the 2 stacks of envelopes lying there sent her right back up again. Ow! Oh no! Like a nightmare she could do nothing about, she watched one stack teeter, and then the letters slid one by one to the floor. No, 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 no! They kept falling anyway until only 3 out of the 30 were left in the chair. What are you doing? He asked with concern. Trying to do the impossible, she said in surrendered exasperation. And it's not working. Under the desk she crawled, gathering applications as she went. She stacked the ones she managed to round up back on the chair, and as she put her hand on the chair to pull herself up, she blew at the loose hair from her forehead in frustration. Her gaze slid around the room as she collapsed onto the carpet. Putting her back against the wall, she shook her head. This is hopeless. What? The youth conference. I've got all these envelopes, and I don't even know where to start. And I haven't gotten 6 hours of sleep in the last 3 days. Right now, I'm about this close to totally losing it. His side went silent for a moment. Would you like some help? That would be nice, she said, meaning from her employees, and not together enough to realize what he really meant. It'll just take me a minute to throw something on, and I'll be there, he said in a rush of words. Be here? Wait, what? Oh, no, I didn't mean... Sit tight. I'll be there as soon as I can. Lisa was sure Jeff hadn't meant the sit-tight comment literally, but that's all she could do. After she hung up, she leaned back against the wall and stared straight ahead. It must be her imagination or a hallucination. She couldn't have just said what she had. More than that couldn't have been his answer. Her hand went up to her hair, but it was too late to fix it. A shower, makeup, a sand blaster. It would take at least that much to make her presentable again, but she had none of that, and he was on his way. "Oh my gosh," Jeff said, when he pushed her door open and saw her sitting on the floor, the bomb blast around her clearly apparent. What in the world happened? "Welcome to my nightmare," she said, as if she was tilting on the edge of sanity, and he arched his eyebrows at the tone in her voice. "What is all this?" Slowly, he stepped over the piles of envelopes into the room and over to where she sat. One foot wrapped under the other, and he sat down on the floor next to her. "This," she said, holding up an envelope, "is the result of letting someone else do something for you. You see this?" She thrust a handful of papers into his hands. "See, no application date. None. Nice, huh? Really great." He took them from her and looked through them slowly. "I've got 762 applications at last count, and not a date on a single one of them." "And the date's important?" "It's first come, first serve, and I've only got 500 seats." Like it was him who had made the mistake, she lunged for his throat, gripped it in her hands, and shook him hard. Then she let him go, smashed her palms against her forehead, and slid them down slowly. "This is a disaster." "I can see that," he said softly. His brain reeled through the problem, cartwheeling over solutions that had no hope of working. "These didn't have the envelopes?" "Jan, Pat, Vera, somebody trashed them at Cordell Enterprises. Why?" "Because the envelopes should have a postmark on them, so you could conceivably—" A moment, and her eyes widened in understanding. "Oh my gosh, you're right." She jumped to her feet and grabbed a stack of letters from the chair. One at a time, she picked through them. September 5th, September 17th, September 3rd. Oh, thank you, God. The chair caught her on the way down. "Yeah," Jeff said, laying the stack of papers in his hand down beside him and picking up a small stack of envelopes next to him. "Now all we have to do is sort through them, put them in order, open them up, and—" She waved at him with both hands to get him to stop. "One thing at a time." Quickly, she pulled something off of her desk, and then, as though it was the most natural thing in the world, she stood, marched back to his side, and sat down. Her fingers flicked the object up. "Box?" He smiled at her. "I'd love one." About 3:30 a.m., Lisa yawned a small yawn, followed instantly by a larger one, and Jeff looked over at her even as she tried to squelch them. "You look wiped," he said gently. "Gee, I wouldn't know why," she retorted, picking up another stack to start sorting it as she leaned back onto the hardwood of the side of her desk. Her fingers went back to work trying to get September 7th to follow September 4th. She was zoning out. She felt it. With a stretch, she tried to open her eyes wider, but that just brought on another yawn. "Here." Jeff reached over to take the stack out of her hand. What are you doing?" Without a response, he took hold of her arm and lifted her from the floor. "You're not going to be good for anything if you don't get some shut-eye." "But I can't—" Not listening to the protest, he led her from the room. "But there's—" Through the dark office they walked until they got to the conference room on the other side. She lowered her gaze skeptically at that room. "What do you want me to sleep on? The table?" "I was thinking the carpet, but it's up to you," he said with half of that smile playing on his lips. "I don't have time for this." "And when you collapse from exhaustion tomorrow, are you going to have time for that?" He worked the black shirt atop his white t-shirt off as he knelt on the floor next to the wall. Now, here. I know it's not the Hilton, but—" When his hand touched hers to pull her down, life thudded to a stop. "Come on," he said, his eyes gentle. "Just a few minutes." Reluctantly, Lisa sat down and then flipped her hair over the shirt on the ground. Her cheek felt its warmth instantly, and all the fight in her vanished. Her eyes closed, and sleep swept over her. That's when she felt it. His hand, warm and soft, lying across her arm. "Get some rest." "Maybe just a few minutes," she said, already drifting away. "But don't forget to wake me up." "I won't." When her mind finally surrendered to the pull of sleep, her last thought was that he still hadn't moved from that spot, and she hoped he would just stay there right next to her forever. Jeff waited until her breathing slowed and found its own rhythm. In the darkness of the room, he was surprised he could see anything, and yet her beauty could pierce even the blackest of the black. He sat for a few more minutes and then pushed up from the floor, catching the edge of the table for balance. With one more look down, he stepped from the room and closed the door softly behind him. A look at his watch verified what he already knew. 4:45, and they still had a mountain to get through. Back in her office, he folded himself onto the carpet and smiled. She was crazy to think she could have tackled this on her own, and she was just crazy enough to have pulled it off, too. He picked up a stack and got back to work. It was the front office door that Lisa heard first. It jolted her from the marvelous dream she was having of them sitting in some field together, flying kites. Slowly she yawned and stretched. That was when she remembered, and causing a head rush, she sat straight up and looked at her watch. It was almost 8. Why hadn't he awakened her? "Jeff?" Sherry said in surprise when she opened the door and found him, rather than Lisa, in the inner office. "What are you doing here?" "Working," he said as his fingers threw the envelopes into the 5 stacks surrounding him, one for each week in September. "Oh," Sherry said, and although it tried, her voice couldn't quite make it sound like that was the exact response she had expected. She looked out into the front office. "Where's Lisa?" "Sleeping," Jeff said, flipping 3 more letters into one of the piles. "Oh," Sherry nodded. "Okay." She started out. "Oh, Sherry, do you have any more of these boxes somewhere?" He held one up. "Maybe—" Her attention jerked outside the door as shock descended across her features. "Lisa?" "Don't say it," he heard Lisa say, and he smiled at the sound. One more small stack, and all they had to do was get the weeks in order. When she walked in, Jeff's heart said how much he had missed her over the last 4 hours. "I'll get some coffee," Sherry said uncertainly, and she left. "Sleep well?" Jeff asked. Lisa sat down in a heap right next to him and dropped the shirt into his lap. "You were supposed to wake me up." He smiled at her. "It's that whole kissing a sleeping princess thing. I knew how much you hated that." "I didn't say you had to kiss me." Her face scrunched together. "There are other ways to wake a person up, you know." Then she really looked at her office and stopped. "You're almost finished?" 10 more, he said, flipping through the last stack in his hand. When the last of them hit the piles, he sighed and scooted back against a chair and wiped his hands over his eyes tiredly. "Now all we have to do is get each week sorted." With a small yawn, he picked one stack up and righted the envelopes. "These we don't have to worry about. They're all last week in September, so we can put them over here and use them only if we have to." That pile landed next to the wall. "Coffee," Sherry said, walking into the room, and after she handed them each a cup, she pulled the box from under her arm. "And here's your box." "Thank you very much." Jeff set his coffee to the side and picked up another stack of envelopes. "I say we start here, last week in August, and work our way forward." We, our, Lisa was waking up enough to catch on to those words, and her heart was suddenly asking why he was sitting in her office, not offering to help, but helping. "You don't have work or something today?" "Nope, it's your lucky day. I'm off until Saturday morning." Thursday to Saturday? She ought to be good and insane in that amount of time. "You really should go home and get some sleep." Lisa heard the phone ring in the outer office, but her mission at the moment was to get him out of hers. "I'm sure you are exhausted." "Lisa," Sherry said through the intercom, "zebra carpet's on line 1. With a tired shake of her head, she pulled herself up from the floor and grabbed the phone. "Matheson Agency, Lisa speaking." "Good, you're there," the voice on the other side said. "Terry forgot to call you about our staff meeting today." "Staff?" "We've got some concepts for promotions we want to bounce off of you." Her hand went to her hair, and she knew with one touch why Sherry had looked at her so strangely when she'd come out of the conference room. "I really don't—" She stopped and sighed. "What time is the meeting?" Without watching her, Jeff watched her. One person standing beneath a mountain of problems and trying to deal with all of them on her own. She had strength and determination in spades, but delegating had obviously gotten lost somewhere along the way. When she hung up, his gaze traced over to her. "Problems?" "You could say that. I'm supposed to be at Zebra Carpets at 10 o'clock. Her shoulders fell forward under the weight of life. "But I can't leave now. Look at this place." "Tell you what," he said gently, holding her up with his gaze and voice as he stood and walked over to her chair. "You go home, grab a shower, get you some non-wrinkled clothes, and then go to your meeting. We'll handle things here." "But what about—" "We'll handle things." Carefully, he lifted her from the chair by one arm. "Now go, and don't worry about us." Exhaustion was good for something, he thought, as he laid her purse over her shoulder and led her to the outer door before pushing her through it. At least she was too tired to argue coherently. "Drive carefully." With only a small wave of acknowledgement, she walked away. When she closed the outer office door, Jeff looked at Sherry like they were on a secret mission together. "How fast can you make a database?" 10 minutes, depending on what's in it," she said, lowering her voice. "Fabulous. This is what we need." Why she was going to Zebra Carpets when it was obvious she should be working on the youth conference, Lisa couldn't clearly tell. She drove home and showered, which felt really good. Then she put on clean clothes, which felt even better, and wrapped her hair into a twist. When she was finished, she actually felt like living again, which was a downright miracle. Grabbing her purse, she trekked to her door and back down to her car. The sooner she got this over, the sooner she got back to the office, the mere thought of which was sending the butterflies in her stomach swirling. Her arm still felt the heat from his hand lying there the night before, and her cheek still felt his shirt curled beneath her. Most of all, her heart still felt what it was like to be in his presence again, and no matter what rationalizations she tried to use on herself, none of them were working. Despite the space and time she had managed to put between them, he had never moved from his place in her heart, and she was beginning to get the sinking feeling that he never would. Every computer in every room of the Matheson agency was manned by an employee diligently entering information into databases configured for the week he or she was working on. Every so often, Jeff would get out of Lisa's chair and go around to check on them, but that really wasn't necessary. They were all intent on getting this done quickly and accurately. When he sat back down in Lisa's chair after one such round, a quiet smile washed over him. Somehow, sitting here, he felt her presence. It was like sunshine on a dark soul, and it felt wonderful. The GTO sitting on the third level was hard to miss when Lisa pulled back in at 12:20. So he was still here. Simultaneously, her mind said that was horrible, and her heart said it was fabulous. At the door to her office, She took a breath, wrenched the doorknob, and stepped resolutely inside. Sherry sat at her desk, and despite the audible snap of the door, she never looked up. "I'm back," Lisa finally said, peering around the ultra-quiet office with concern. "Everybody out for lunch?" "No, the guys are in the back. Jeff's working on your computer." Sherry took a bite of her sandwich without ever really looking up. "My computer? On what?" "Database," Sherry said, setting one paper to the side and scrutinizing the information on her computer slowly. Lisa arched her eyebrows. "Okay." Without another word, she walked to her office door and peered inside. Sherry was absolutely right. There sat Jeff, surrounded by the blue window at his back, looking very much like Sherry had, totally engrossed in what he was doing. "Knock, knock." He looked up, and some part of her deep down said she liked that look in his eyes. "Back already?" "It wasn't as bad as I thought," she said, swinging her purse into the chair opposite the desk and noticing that there were no longer envelopes stacked everywhere. Slowly, she followed her purse into the chair. "What'd you do with the envelopes?" "Collating." "Huh?" she asked, wondering what rabbit hole she had fallen down. "We're putting them all in this database Sherry came up with so we can collate them and put the kids in the workshops in the order they applied. Much easier than doing it on paper." Still, his attention seemed riveted to the screen. "And Kurt and Joel?" "Third and fourth week," Jeff said. "I've almost got this first week done, Sherry's on week 2, and once that's done, all we have to do is put in the earlier ones and shuffle." She felt like she was shuffling, but not the items in a database. At that moment, Kurt appeared at the door. "I got 3 done," he said. Then he stopped when he saw Lisa. "Oh, hi." "Hi," she said, turning to look at him doubtfully. "Great." Jeff pulled the stack of non-enveloped papers out. "Put these in a separate one, and we'll be in business." Kurt took the papers and disappeared as Lisa looked after him in astonishment. "How did you get him to do that?" "What?" "He got something done." "Of course he got something done. That's the point, isn't it?" Yes, it was the point. So why did she have so much trouble getting it accomplished? "So, can I help with this little project of yours?" Instantly, he looked up. "Oh, I'm sorry. You want to finish this?" "Not really." Her smile came, although she wasn't sure she wanted it to. "How about if I finalize the workshop schedule, so when you're ready to collate, it'll be ready too?" "Good plan." On wobbly legs, she stood and walked over beside him at the computer, taking the mouse from him. When he looked up, she was only inches away, and she felt his gaze. "Just let me print out the stuff I have, and the computer's all yours." The edges of her skin melted under his gaze. He wanted to say something. She felt it, and yet he recalibrated his attention back to the computer. In seconds, the printer was working its magic. When it was finished, she took the sheaves back around to the other chair. "Don't mind me. I'll just be over here, working." This has been To Protect and Serve, Volume 1 of the Courage series. Written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings. This has been a Braveheart Audiobooks production.
You don't want to miss what comes next. Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.